get on to our science critic, and we always
We
love
have
to hear him.
critics? What?
No, he's criticizing the scientific method. Can you believe that? 400
Who
years
would
later.
do something like that?
Yeah. Anyways, here he is. He is going to talk about experiments. He's saying experiments are part of, science. And we're saying, no, they're not. And so listen to him. Here he goes. Listen carefully.
The questions and issues to be addressed in this rebuttal include, are experiments a part of science? And does performing an experiment make you a scientist?
Bill, what do you think scientists do with their time after they graduate? Do you think that they just sit around reading books or something? I mean, sure, reading will definitely be a part of it. There is peer review that has to be done after all. But, you actually have to write papers when you're a scientist. And most likely, you'll also have to do experiments in order to verify the things that you're talking about. Studying can be done by performing experiments, which is something that scientists do when studying. I remember that a large part of my studies were hands-on, especially when it came to things like audio production where you had to set up mics because how else are you going to learn? I have studied computers and audio. That does not make me a scientist.
Okay? So he says that experiments are part of science, but at the same time, he says doing experiments and studying does not make you a scientist. He seems to have a contradiction. I don't think he understands what he even said. Yeah. Because on the one hand, he says studying and experiments are part of science or define science. And then on the other says, well, the fact that you study and that you do experiments do not make you a scientist. Okay, so here we go. This is a summary essentially of my criticism of his criticism. Okay, here it goes. Science is not studying. Okay, because you can study all day, all night, all year. You can study at the university level and not understand a thing or be able to explain anything. And what is science? Science is rational explanations. Otherwise, you're not a scientist if you haven't explained anything.
Well, it depends on how you define study.
Well,
if you study and you can't explain, some would argue you didn't study at all.
Well, you can study doesn't mean you're going to understand. You can read a book on math and not understand anything. Maybe you don't have the foundations to understand what you're reading or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that if you cannot explain, you're not a scientist because science is explanation.
Are you saying, wait, let me break that down a little more then. Are you saying that taking in information isn't the scientific part? That's like,
right. That's more or less
spitting out information is the scientific part. Like as much as you could read every book in the world, you're not a scientist yet. Even if you know everything, until you spit it out of your mouth, you're not a scientist.
And it's not only spitting
it's like a professor.
out.
You have to profess.
Hold it, but it's not just spitting out in the sense that, I just say whatever I wrote. I recite poetry. No, that's not science. Science is explain to me something.
But
right?
You could be reciting an explanation that someone else gave.
As long as it's an explanation, no problem.
That's what I'm saying. But you would definitely cut off between if the guy read every single Wikipedia and he could explain everything. He's not a scientist yet until he explains.
I'm saying he's got to explain because if he just even if he recites, I mean, I don't care, because maybe it's his theory. He needs to read it. I don't care. But it's got to be an explanation. If it's just a description,
that makes sense.
What did he do with his brain? I mean, I can describe a chair. That doesn't make me a scientist.
It's kind of weird when you put it like that. Then you could make that identity thing. You could extrapolate that to anything. A businessman, you're not a businessman if you read every business book in the world until you actually do business. Then you're a businessman.
Or explain something in business.
But that's the thing. Unless you do something with it, you're not a doer. You're just a consumer.
Yeah, and in science, the doer, it means you have to explain it at the conference. When you come to the conference, we don't want you to describe something or say, this is what I did in my basement. Yeah. So what? So what that you did this in your, which is what Faraday used to do. He would do all these experiments at the Royal Society, where he did things with magnetism and electricity. He didn't understand anything, but he said, look how neat this is. So he just wowed them with his flashy experiments, but he couldn't explain any of them.
But I mean,
so does that make Faraday a scientist?
I mean, who cares if they're a scientist or not? Really, all we care about is the explanation. We don't care about the person.
Anyways, here it is. Study does not imply you can explain, right? The purpose of experiments is to collect evidence. What is the purpose of evidence? To persuade. Persuade, convince, convert, recruit, all that has to do with religion. Okay, that's opinion. That goes on belief. It attacks belief. It doesn't explain anything. It's just trying to convince you. Buy my theory, please. That's what it's all about. That's what experiments are about.
Well, some would argue that you need to do experiments to even get the questions.
Yeah, but that's research. Research is not science.
Yeah, but that's kind of part of it because you're not trying to explain things of other dimensions that we can't even.
I can do all the research I want. That doesn't mean I can explain anything.
Yeah. But it is kind of part. You can't rip out the.
I do.
until you drop the pencil, there's no gravity to explain.
For this, you need to define what science is. And if science is explanation, it rules out any investigation. It rules out any research, any experience, anything that you did in your dark basement. We don't care. When you come to the conference, please explain. Otherwise, what are you going to do? Just say, this is the experiment I did at home. Okay, it's like Faraday used to do.
Well, yeah,
and
you
say, okay, what did you understand? I didn't understand anything, but this is
why does it have to be
a neat
either?
experiment.
Why does it have to be either or? Why does it have to be either experimenter only or explainer only? Why not both?
Because the mathematicians only do measurement,
Yeah, then
meaning
they're not
experiments,
scientists.
and then they bring an equation to the conference. They say,
Then
this is
they're
the
not
equation.
scientists. Then they're
Yeah,
not
but that's a
scientists.
description.
Yeah, because they only did half of it.
Well,
They only did the experiment part. They didn't do the
yeah, they
explanation
did
part.
stuff that
But
had
if
nothing
someone-
to do with
but if-
science.
But I
They
would
did technology.
But I would still put the experiment under science. Some
Okay.
part of it.
Anyway, let me finish here with this. In fact, the critic, right? Science critic, admits that hands-on does not make you a scientist. He said, a large part of my studies were hands-on experiments, right? I have studied computers and audio. That does not make me a scientist. Absolutely right. It doesn't make you a scientist, and these are your own words. So he doesn't understand the context, because at least on the one hand, he says you need to study and you need to do experiments. I'm saying you need to do neither study nor experiments. What you need to do is explain. I don't care if you studied or not, but if you can explain something even without studying, without doing experiments, you're a scientist. You're using your brain. But to say you studied, you memorized the book, you know the poem, and you can recite it by heart, and you can't explain anything, you're just describing, what a tree looks like, you beautiful, love, etc. That's not science.
Aren't you stamp collecting right now?
Huh?
When you talk about he's a scientist, he's not a scientist. Isn't that stamp collecting?
Well, yeah. We have to know what a scientist is because
Why am I asked who a scientist is?
Because
I don't care if you're a scientist or not. Can you explain what the fuck I asked?
what I'm saying, you need to define what science is, because if we're going to say that physics is a science, we need to know what science is first. Then we need to know why physics is a science. And they have to, if I say science is rational explanations, physics is rational explanations of causes and mechanisms, then I have a logical framework for, talking about science.
Sounds like a lot of
But
stamp
if
collecting to me.
people give you 2 paragraphs full to define what science is, and then another 10 paragraphs to define what physics is, because they have all these semicolons and commas and periods, then we have whatever. We have what we have today.